Hello and welcome to my podcast. My name is Andrea Hackel and I'm your queer life coach. On this podcast, we will take a queer perspective on the deeper meaning of life and discuss topics related to self-help, personal growth, and spirituality through an inclusive lens. Together, we will also explore tools and practices that will help you live a more empowered and authentic life. Thank you so much for joining. Now let's get started with today's episode. Hello and welcome back to the show. If you're new here, thank you so much for tuning in. Really excited to get started in this second part in a two-part conversation about the queer hero's journey. If you're new to the show, I would also recommend listening to the first episode because this episode is going to directly build on episode 1. But before we jump into today's discussion, I want to quickly recap what we talked about in episode 1. So again, we're using the book The Hero Within by Carol S. Pearson as a framework. In the book, the author discusses 6 archetypes that help explain cycles of transformation that we experience throughout our lives. Those 6 archetypes are the innocent, the orphan, the martyr, the wanderer, the warrior, and the magician. And we discussed the first 3 archetypes of the innocent, the orphan, and the martyr on our first episode. And I also used those 3 archetypes to tell you about my journey, starting with my fall from innocence and graduating from my PhD program and entering the real world in Washington, D.C., where I felt totally lost. And my marriage not working, so really living a life in DC that did not resonate with my soul, then to experiencing a turning point in my story when I received a call that my estranged father in Austria was going to pass soon, and traveling back to Austria for what I thought would be our final conversation, to then finding out that he had passed away while I was on the plane. And realizing that the way my life looked like was not working and that there were some long overdue changes I had to make. So this is where we left things off during last week's episode. I will tell you more about this journey in just a little bit. And I believe it's an interesting story that brought me to an amazing place. So I can't wait to tell you more about it. But first, I want to go back to the book to talk about the archetype of the wanderer. So according to the book, the wanderer archetype is really the time when we say yes to adventure and step into the unknown. This is where we start to shed old roles and identities to go within and really look for our authentic selves and claiming our authentic selves. And as you may recall from our last episode during the orphan archetype or the orphan stage, we look to other people for the answers. But embodying the wanderer archetype, this is where we finally go within to find our own truth, claim our own truth, and starting to live that. And before I tell you more about how that showed up on my journey, I also want to preface this by saying that I will always be a wanderer at heart. I'm a spiritual seeker. I've lived in different places in Europe and the US, lived in different places within the US. So I'm a wanderer at heart. But now I want to tell you more about how this archetype also showed up on my journey of finding and reclaiming my authentic self. So picking things up in my journey where we left off last time. After my father's death and arriving back in DC, I had a strong sense that things will never be the same again and that there were some really important changes that were long overdue. For a few months, I didn't make any decisions really, but just went within and tried to listen more and more to that inner voice that I'd silenced over the last decade or so. And throughout my life, I'd resorted to different types of distractions from the voice within and the painful memories. In my early 20s, it was partying and drinking. Later, I replaced it with overworking. But pretty soon, the universe took away the distractions and finally pushed me to go within. After a couple months of being back in DC, still struggling with my job, my marriage was in a really bad place. So things were numbing at best, but I knew I had to make some changes. So I remember going to a conference in New York and having a weekend in New York, just wandering around the conference kind of on autopilot. And all of a sudden, I got that inner voice, the inner pull saying, you need to quit your job. And it wasn't inner pull of, oh, you should start looking for something else, because I had done that for the last several years, but it was the call to quit my job. And I'm not recommending anyone to just take that leap and quit their jobs. This is really me advocating for listening to your gut feeling and listening to your inner voice as compared to what the people around you are saying. So going back to this decision point in my life, no matter how I twisted or turned it, I was not in a good place. My mental health was spiraling. I knew it was time to quit my job. It was time to take the leap of faith, even though I had no idea where that road would take me. So I finally, after a time of wandering and ruminating, I finally quit my job. I was pretty naive of what my life would look like after quitting my job. I thought I would spend a month or two working on my book, writing, really going for my creative vision, I would say. And then I thought after 1 or 2 months, I'm going to find another job and just go back to another full time job. It didn't happen that way. Let's put it that way. I had a hard time finding a job. I think everyone who knows me well knows I'm not made for DC, so I wasn't prepared for the networking culture. I wasn't prepared for all the happy hours. I wasn't prepared for any of it. And so finding a job was quite an experience. I sent out 100 or maybe more applications, had help from friends. I was invited for some interviews. Nothing panned out. I was doing consulting to get money in, but I was sitting at home already pretty depressed. But then the COVID pandemic hit, and obviously I was not the only one experiencing that. So that almost was like a global wake up call to go within. In more than one way, I felt really isolated. I just desperately wanted to find a job, but that didn't work out. And as I mentioned earlier, this now looking back all of these years later, I can see how this was really an invitation from the universe to stop with the distractions, whether it's drinking, partying, overworking, and go within and look at some painful experiences and childhood memories that had been holding me back. All of a sudden, there were no more distractions, and I finally had to go within and look at those experiences and memories. And one day I was sitting at home working on my computer, and I remember some pretty triggering memories from my childhood coming back from when I was 12, 13, and I had issues at home with my family of origin and being emotionally neglected and experiencing bullying at school at the same time, and how isolated and alone I was during that time. And yeah, for the first time in my life, I couldn't shut out those memories. And I knew it was time to look at some of those triggering memories and turn them into something else besides pain. I ended up doing ART therapy, accelerated resolution therapy, which is similar to EMDR therapy. And I want to preface this by saying I'm not here to give any medical or mental health advice. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a therapist, not a psychiatrist, not any of these. My PhD is in communication studies. So I'm in no position to give you medical or mental health advice. But what I want to do here is tell you my story in case it's helpful for someone out there listening. So yeah, I started doing ART therapy, which was one of the most interesting experiences in my life. I remember before every session, I felt like going into battle. It was so hard. I was so scared. It really showed me a strength and a resilience I had within that really did not know I had. And again, looking at those painful memories and experiences underlying the invisible emotional scars I'd been carrying for all these years was really, really difficult. But having gone through this process, now I can say they don't carry the same emotional weight anymore. And in many ways it also allowed me to see how patterns of feeling invisible and unseen and othered in my life, how they directly related back to painful memories and how those experiences shaped me and who I am. In other ways, it also became a super empowering experience. At the end of each session, my therapist would say, director's cut, and I had to replay each memory, but create my own ending, an empowered ending in the way that I would have wanted it to end. And that became a very empowering experience because I would think back on those memories and being able to end each of the experiences in an empowering way where I would say no, where I would speak up to people, where I would stand up for myself and become my own advocate in a way. That became a very empowering experience for me. There were also some memories where I ended up creating that director's cut of the grown-up version of Andrea showing up for that 12, 13-year-old version of me that felt so lost in the world. And that was super empowering. And again, I'm not a therapist, but in a way, it almost feels like this was the beginning of deep inner child work and start this process of me coming to a place of loving myself and standing up for myself and being my own best friend. And now that I've gone within to look at those shadow sides that been preventing me from living the life that felt truly aligned with my soul and heart, it was time to go out in the world and create the life that felt more authentic and aligned. But before I could do that, I had to let go of everything that was no longer aligned. And this is where I entered the warrior stage. Let's go back to the book to see what the author tells us about the warrior archetype. Embodying the warrior archetype, this is where we claim our own power and assert ourselves. We start setting boundaries and speaking up and value ourselves enough to say no to things, people, and relationships that are no longer aligned with ourselves and our spirits. This is where we develop the skills to claim our own truth and not only claim it, but also to act on it. And this is where we also confront our fears and see them as opportunities for growth. This also becomes a time of taking action and really going for our goals. At the same time, the author also talks about how one of the main lessons we learn during this stage or when we embody this archetype is seeing our own powerlessness. And this is where we also realize we can't do everything by ourselves. There's community out there, friends out there supporting us. There's a universe, a higher power, whatever you want to call it, out there working with us. So we also need to learn to let go of particular outcomes and surrender at some point in our journeys. So the way this warrior archetype showed up for me was after doing this deep inner work, going within and working through some painful experiences and memories from childhood. After that experience of doing the ART therapy, I never looked at the world in the same way again. And it gave me, in some ways, it felt like it gave me my life back. And the way I would describe it is that before ART therapy, things were not totally bleak, but I mostly saw the world in shades of gray. And it was almost like seeing in color for the first time in my life and really seeing the people around me, noticing the world around me. And it was a big aha moment of, I am not the only one in this world. And life or the world does not revolve around my problems. and that I have agency and responsibility to take charge of my life. And that would require me to set boundaries and to start saying no to things, relationships, people that were no longer aligned. After working through those issues, it was time to make some long overdue changes. Again, I was still looking for a full-time job without success, and pretty soon me and my ex-wife decided that it was time to leave DC and start over somewhere new. And around the same time, I ended up getting a job offer in California. And once the COVID restrictions lifted a bit, me and my ex-wife moved to the Bay Area. And I really saw this move to California as a new chapter for our relationship. But arriving in the Bay Area, we pretty soon realized that things are not working. And so we made the difficult decision to divorce. We're able to remain really good friends, and you will hear more about this in future episodes as well. It's been quite a beautiful process. So here we were in a new city, not knowing many people yet, but we had a deep knowing that it was time to get a divorce. Soon it was time to move into our own separate places. And I remember waking up by myself in my bachelorette pad in Oakland for the first time in nearly a decade. So I tend to get up very early, and I would get up around 5:30, 6 a.m. and sit on my couch with my morning coffee and a book, just looking outside the window and watching the sunrise and reflecting on all of the changes that I'd experienced over the last several years. I didn't have many friends in the Bay Area yet, didn't have a sense of community. I was in the process of getting my divorce papers started. Also, I left another job because I realized that it was time to follow the dreams and vision in my heart. So there was lots of uncertainty. It was scary. I was terrified. But at the same time, I had a deep inner sense that this was exactly where I needed to be in order to move forward with my life, in order to live a life that feels more aligned with my heart and soul. And that reminded me of a song that has had a special place in my heart since my early 20s. Hey man, now you're really living by the eels. If you don't know that song, it's amazing. Check it out. The first time I heard this song was when I was an exchange student in Ohio. So when I was in my early 20s, I spent an exchange year in a small town in Ohio. And I came out during my time in Ohio, which was really difficult for me. And I remember a friend of mine who was an exchange student as well, who helped me through the coming out process. He would play the song, Hey Man, Now You're Really Living, to me, and would say, hey, see, Andrea, now you know what it feels like to be alive, and at least you're not numb anymore. And that is exactly how I felt like in my early 20s in Ohio after I'd come out. And this is also how I felt like during my early days living by myself in Oakland. There was so much uncertainty, so much anxiety, but at least I no longer numbed myself out to life. I no longer lived a life on autopilot. Once again in my life, I felt like I finally stepped back into the life that I came here to live. And this is where you find me today. I'm in this stage of having let go of my old life, already in some ways have taken steps into my new life, but really the new chapter is only just beginning. But before I tell you more about that, let's go back to the book and discuss the magician archetype. During this stage, we've really cultivated listening to our own intuition, listening to our heart and inner truth, and claiming our authentic selves. This is where we're invited to fully learn how to love ourselves and all parts of ourselves. That also includes our shadow selves. And this again requires us to look at painful memories, go within, looking at our shadow sides, and again, really committing to the deep inner work. And this is where we're also invited to learn how to surrender and let go and let the universe guide us towards the actions we should be taking in order to build a life that feels more aligned as compared to taking fear-driven actions. And this is where we're also invited to learn that life is not just about being happy, but really about experiencing a range of emotions. as compared to viewing as emotions as good or bad or things that we should or shouldn't feel. Really allowing ourselves to living and experiencing all emotions. The way this showed up in my life, and again, I'm just in the beginning stages of this, of building the life that feels really aligned with my soul. So I'm starting to build community. Had a really beautiful experience of working with my ex-wife to transform our marriage that wasn't working into a really strong friendship. Also moving more and more into a professional direction that feels more aligned. And again, I'm not fully there yet. I'm still building this life. And on good days, when I'm in a really good place, I really see the uncertainty as an opportunity to create a life that is fully aligned with my soul. Of course, there's the bad days when I feel anxious and stressed out and I want things to happen faster and get impatient. But again, this is also an invitation to realize that life is about experiencing all emotions and it isn't just about being happy. I'm also committed to continuing the inner work of looking within, reflecting on certain patterns, and really claiming those shadow parts of me in order to come to a place of fully loving myself. And again, I talked about this in episode 1 that loving myself had always seemed like something out of reach, but more and more I saw how in my life I would speak up for myself, say no to things. This also became a time of really getting serious about my spiritual connection with the universe and doubling down on my spiritual practices, including meditation, prayer, journaling, and yeah, really stepping into that relationship with the universe that became a major source of support during a time of uncertainty in my life. Of course, I'm still experiencing challenges and hard times, but what has changed is my view on challenges and obstacles. I now try to view challenges more through a lens of, okay, what is it that I can learn from this challenge? This might not be the desired outcome or the outcome I'd hoped for, but what can I learn from this experience in order to move forward in life? And that's not always easy to do. And of course, I'm not always in the headspace to do that. But whenever I'm able to look at challenges through this lens, it helps me to move forward in a more empowered way. Interestingly, the author also considers the magician archetype to be inherently androgynous, as we're called to balance our male and female energies. And interestingly, in this process, as I was finding myself going within to look at the story of my life, I also came out as non-binary, and I realized how so many of the experiences in my life at school, with my family, with certain job experiences, that my gender identity was another thing that I had to look at, because people had always viewed me in a way that told me I'm different from them, but I never dared to look deeper, and now realized, oh, it makes sense because I'm non-binary. That's why I kind of stick out in the world and with the people around me, and that's okay. And really claiming that part of myself and loving that part of myself has been and continues to be a super empowering journey. And I'm also looking forward to reflecting and discussing that journey of discovering my gender identity in more detail in future episodes. So, yeah, that's my journey, and this is where you find me today. We have many more interesting episodes coming up, and I can't wait to update you on my journey and where it continues to steer me. Before we wrap up for today, I also wanted to leave you with another activity and invite you to look at one area in your life. Could be professionally, personally, in relationships, financially. I invite you to look at a time when you have gone on a hero's journey and how the 6 different archetypes showed up during this journey. Again, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. And I hope you bear with me with any technical issues. That's a skill that I'm hoping to build as well. I also hope that eventually I'll have a way for you to send in questions. So yeah, we have some, what I hope to be fun stuff coming up, and I can't wait to share this journey with you. Thanks again so much. And I hope you're kind to yourself today, because It's not an easy world, but you got this. I'm sending you only the very best vibes.